not ESPN, not Fox Sports, nowhere. Okay, let's get right into this. Let me get some music going. Okay, and let me get my Google Docs up. You guys know I love my Google Docs. Let's start with the player who, this is the reason why I'm doing this whole thing. It's Christian Wood. I do not want Christian Wood on the Dallas Mavericks. I tweeted something out and got some shit for it, that I would rather have Dwight Powell starting in the starting lineup next year in the trade for Christian Wood, and people lost their minds because people didn't process the fact that I said trade for Christian Wood. Okay, Christian Wood, a good player, borderline all-star player, right? He does what he does pretty well. It's time. Around this time a year ago, I made a video going over 5 players I did not want the Dallas Mavericks to trade for. And of course, the star of the video, Christian Wood, was traded to the Dallas Mavericks merely a few days later. So this year I'm returning to once again go over 5 players I don't want the Dallas Mavericks to trade for. Now, I've had some people in my community be like, hey man, just sneak on somebody you actually want the Mavericks to trade for. Because I have had some weird superpowers when it comes to willing trades into existence. Like the Spencer Dinwiddie trade, and the Christian Wood trade, and the Kyrie Irving trade. But I'll never cheat the game. These are all players I legitimately do not want the Dallas Mavericks to trade for. Now, let me start by saying this, okay? I'm not saying any of these guys are bad players. In fact, everybody on this list, except for one guy, you'll know who I'm talking about, is a good player, right? But we're talking about trades. We're talking about giving up value for a player. And for these guys, I just don't know if what the Mavericks would have to give up in order to get the player. I don't know if it's worth it, especially considering how much the Mavericks need, 1, and 2, the limited assets they have, right? Is it worth blowing your whole entire load for one guy when you really need 2 guys or 3 guys? Is it worth going after a scorer, a guy who's primarily a scorer, when you need rebounding, you need size, you need athleticism, you need wing defense? That's what we're here to talk about today. Let's get into it. Let's start with a big one. Let's start with a banger. There's been rumors over the past couple of days that this guy could be on the chopping block, could be traded to a new team in the coming weeks. That is Karl Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves. It makes sense from the Timberwolves' point of view, right? You're paying Gobert an absurd amount of money. Anthony Edwards is contract extension eligible this year, as is Jaden McDaniels. You're going to pay those guys. You need to go out and find a long-term point guard, right? Because you traded away D'Lo instead of paying him. That was smart on your end. But you brought in Mike Conley, who's, in the twilight of his career. It makes sense to trade him. Not to the Mavericks, though. I don't want any piece of it. Just with the way the CBA is, the new CBA, it's not smart. It's not a good decision to have several guys making $50+ million a year on your roster. And you look at a guy like Karl Anthony Towns, his average annual salary sitting at $56 million a year makes him the highest paid player in the history of the National Basketball Association when you look at average annual salary. Of course, that'll change in the coming years as contracts get different and players are getting more money, whatever the case may be. But yeah, no thanks. Look at this guy in the regular season. I mean, he's an absurdly talented offensive player. There's no doubting that. 23.5 points per game last regular season. Of course, he missed a good chunk of it, but 10 rebounds a game, 5 assists per game, 52% from the field, 40% from deep. Those are tremendous numbers, right? Offensively. But then you dive a little bit deeper, and more specifically, you get into the postseason side of things where it gets brutally bad. Sorry, I just had to pause the video because somebody in my apartment complex is driving their huge fucking Ford F-150 Raptor with the fucking exhaust pipe that makes it sound like it's a tank going through our apartment complex. Why? Are you going to the ranch? No, you're not. You live in the city. Sell the car. Anyways, over the last 2 postseasons, Karl Anthony Towns, minus 6.7 net rating. The Timberwolves defense, this is shocking. The Timberwolves defense over the last 2 playoffs has been 13 points per 100 possessions better when he is off of the court. 13. That is a huge swing. I mentioned his great regular season numbers a few moments ago, but his postseason numbers over the past 2 seasons, 20 points per game. That's nearly 4 points per game down. 10 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 turnovers per game. He's had more games in his postseason career with 5 or more turnovers than with 20 or more points. He's had a positive plus minus only 3 times in 16 playoff games. I just don't know how you win with a guy like this on a postseason team. We've seen it throughout NBA history, especially recent NBA history. It's hard to win in the playoffs with bigs like this, with centers like this. And you look at some of like these mock trades, I don't even remember which publication posted these, and that's probably for the best. Some of these mock trades for Karl-Anthony Towns. How about Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, the 3rd overall pick? Wow, that's okay. Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and the 4th overall pick. All right, so what the fuck is that team going to be, huh? Kevin Porter Jr. and Karl-Anthony Towns. Wow, that sounds like fun basketball. RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, and 5 first-round picks for Karl-Anthony Towns. Obviously, I don't think that's his value whatsoever. In fact, I don't even think I'd want to give up the 10th overall pick for him, just considering, 1, contract, 2, it's hard to win with players like this. Like, you just don't. You historically do not win with centers like this on your roster. Again, very talented offensive player. I would really be interested to see what his market is. Really would. I've already tweeted out that if the Mavericks end up trading for Karl-Anthony Towns for some reason, I will go live, do a full 8-hour stream, only doing Luka Doncic trade scenarios, because that's exactly where it's headed. All right, the next player up, a player who I didn't even want to mention because it's so obvious, and I don't think it's going to happen, but like I can't even begin to describe to you guys how little I want this player on my basketball team that I have to include him. That is D'Angelo Russell of the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I think for this to only happen, it would have to be Kyrie Irving going to the Lakers and the Mavericks feeling desperate, sign and trading him for D'Angelo Russell. And I'll just say this, I would much rather have nothing. Like, I would rather the Lakers figure out a way to open up cap space themselves and just sign Kyrie outright than D'Angelo Russell coming to the Dallas Mavericks making $20+ million a year or whatever it is. I would literally rather have nothing than watch this guy on my basketball team. D'Angelo Russell would non-consensually suck the enjoyment of basketball out of my body entirely if he were the starting point guard on my team. I want nothing to do with it. A career 38% shooter in the postseason. 38. At worst, his shot selection is like a shit stain on the beautiful history of the National Basketball Association, and at best it's like, oh my god, what the fuck, what is he doing? Why is he okay? He made the shot. Everyone calm down. It's just a constant heart attack. And my big thing with him and players like him, all right, his shot's not falling, he's not making shots, pretty frequent for him in the playoffs. What does he provide? Oh, horrible defense. Oh, pretty gross offense and terrible shot selection. Very, very slow pace. Great, that's the type of player I want on my team. All right, I promise you the last 3 players here are a little bit controversial. They're a little bit going out there and maybe going against the grain of what people want, okay? Nobody really wants to give up a lot to pay Karl-Anthony Towns $60 million a year. Nobody actually wants D'Angelo Russell. These next 3 players, there are some fan clubs of them. And I'll start with OG Anunoby from the Toronto Raptors. This one's a little bit controversial. I'm not saying OG's not good, but hear me out a little bit here, okay? Smoking Cuban released a trade scenario article, a mock trade, right? A fan-sided blog for the Dallas Mavericks. The trade was Jaden Hardy, Davis Bertans, the 10th overall pick, and a future first for OG. And I just got to say, I can't help but feel like OG has become one of the most overrated, I don't know about overrated players, but for sure one of the most overrated assets in all of the NBA, because that's asinine. Here's the thing, right? If the Mavericks were a player like OG away from winning, and they had legit assets to give up, I could see them doing the Drew Holiday-like trade for OG. Not that I'm comparing those two, but just, maybe overpaying a tiny bit to go and get the guy that you think completes your roster and really propels you to be a championship team. That's not where the Mavericks are at, though. The Mavericks are in absolutely no position to give up everything they have to give up for OG. He doesn't solve everything for you. Sure, he definitely solves your wing defense, and he'd be the best defender you've had since Tyson Chandler, like maybe even longer than that. 99th percentile matchup difficulty, 100th percentile in matchup versatility, 99th percentile in on-ball defense. But then you go a little bit deeper, right? He's 1 year away from free agency. Are you really excited about paying a guy like this $20+ million a year, $25+ million a year maybe, to keep him on your team? Because the offensive side of things for OG, it's still all hypothetical. Most of it still is hypothetical. He was one of, if not maybe the worst isolation player in the entire NBA this past season. First percentile in isolation points per possession. That's not what you want to be first in. That's not percentile stats you don't want to be first in. 0.70 points per possession in isolation. 6th percentile in post-ups. Still just not a guy who can create his own offense, and probably will never be. Like, if we're just being brutally honest. 14th percentile in points over expectation. 1.06 point per possessions on spot ups. That's a solid number, but if that's like your strong suit offensively, it's not incredible or anything. He's just still a project offensively. And am I like excited and jumping up and down with joy if I'm giving up everything I have to give up for trades for a guy like OG? As the Mavericks, no, not really. Other teams around the league, like the Grizzlies, for example, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. For the Mavericks, it just doesn't. It just really doesn't. Another player I've seen grow in popularity quite a bit lately in Mavericks mock trades, Keldon Johnson of the San Antonio Spurs. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit here as well. There's been a pretty popular mock trade going around. I think the Locked On Mavs guys are primarily responsible for this one. 10th overall pick, Tim Hardaway Jr. or Davis Bertans for Keldon Johnson. And when you look at it, when you think about it, it seems fair, right? Keldon's a solid player. He's 23 years old. He's under contract for the next 4 years. But it's just, I don't know if he's what the Mavericks need. I just don't. He's 6'5", so he's a little bit smaller for like what you would want him to be, which is a forward. But that's okay. There's been smaller guys who have excelled at their positions. He graded out as one of the absolute worst defenders in basketball last season. I don't know how much of that is just playing on a bad team, you know, being the primary guy offensively on a bad team, just having to exert energy on one end. You don't have enough energy for the other, but it didn't look good. Like anytime I watch the Spurs games, I remember being like, damn, has Keldon Johnson always been this ass on defense? A pretty rebounder, just an inefficient volume scorer a year ago. And I do worry about those guys, right? When the guys on bad teams who are just, you know, given a green light to do whatever they want, I do worry about them. Because in an ideal world, you could scale them back, you know, say, hey, you're not doing that here. But it's pretty easy to pick up bad habits on bad teams. 35% on catch and shoot threes. Would like that number to be much higher. Like 90% of his 3-point attempts are catch and shoot threes. So you would like that number to be higher. 55% true shooting. Again, that's not great. I'll give him this though. He's a great finisher. Great at getting to the rim. 62% at the rim. Fantastic job generating pressure on the rim. And he's got some playmaking upside. So I get having him be your like 4, because that's what you would want him to be. Having him be your 4, he's like a connective passer. He can attack the rim, attack closeouts, catch and shoot, but a lot of it is hypothetical with him. And defensively, it's just not what the Mavericks need. And I don't know if there's something on tap there. He's smaller. He's not that athletic. I've seen people say, well, Keldon Johnson could be like the Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon is huge and an athletic freak. That's not happening for Keldon Johnson. Okay? They don't make those type of steroids yet. And on top of that, $20 million a year over the next 4 years, that could end up being a pretty good contract if he develops a little bit more, or like if he's in San Antonio and he becomes like the 3rd or 4th guy and he ends up blossoming in that role, that could be a really nice contract. But I kind of would just rather draft. Like, honestly, I kind of would just rather take my chances with the 10th overall pick and see if I can get a younger, you know, guy who fits what I need a little bit more and is a cheaper deal. Like, if I'm just being real and giving up Tim, I don't know about that. All right, I struggled to figure out a 5th guy, and I'm just gonna do this. I know I made a whole big fuss about this when it was going down, but the more I think about it, 1, I don't think it's ever gonna happen in a million years, but 2, it also shouldn't. That is LeBron James. It pains me to say it. LeBron is my GOAT, and I love that. Come on, LeBron, put your Maverick jersey on. Yeah, it's time to get it on. Yeah, I love the song, but there's just no real trade that makes sense. There's no package that makes sense. You would have to give up everything. And I'm not just saying that because that's his value, but in order to make the salaries work, you would actually have to give up pretty much every single thing on your roster to make this work. And truth be told, as much as I do love LeBron, I don't think like LeBron's solving really anything that you need right now. Sure, it's another guy who can be, you know, another playmaker, another passer, another scorer. I'm not taking anything away from him. Defensively, there's moments still with LeBron where it's like, okay, he's still a pretty solid defender. Rebounding is fine. But like, I don't know. There's other pathways to success than going after, you know, 39-year-old LeBron because he's going to turn 39 next season. It's just like, as fun as it would be, trust me, because it would be fun. The memes, the hilarity of it all, the circus that would come with it. Just the fact that LeBron James was a member of the Dallas Mavericks. Like, yeah, it would be insane. But just from a team building perspective, it really doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And I applaud Kyrie for wanting to recruit, but it doesn't make sense. How about some honorable mention guys? Some guys who I just didn't really think were like high profile enough to include them on this list, but I still do not want on my team at all. Obviously DeAndre Ayton, but I've talked so much shit about DeAndre Ayton for the last 3 years. I really can't bring myself to do it again. Like Yusuf Nurkic, I see him get mock traded to the Mavs all the time. Please, God, no. That is sneaky one of the worst contracts in the NBA. And he is abysmally bad. Like, the guy just absolutely reeks. Rashawn Holmes, this is still a guy who gets mock traded to the Mavericks a bunch. I'm not that interested in a guy making $15 million or whatever he's making who's just not in the rotation. No, thank you. How about this little reverse one? Davis Bertans. Oh, what the? Davis Bertans is already on the team. I don't want the Mavericks to feel like they need to trade Davis Bertans so badly that they have to attach the 10th overall pick just to dump him. All right. It doesn't make much sense to me. The contract is bad, but it's really not brutal. It's only $5 million guaranteed next year if he plays 75% of the games this year. He's not playing 75% of the games this year, so he's essentially an expiring contract with only $5 million guaranteed. That is not worth getting off of that is not worth attaching the 10th overall pick. It's just not at all. I hope they don't feel the pressure to do this. Plus, you can wait. From what I understand, I'm not a cap expert at all, but from what I understand, you can waive and stretch him and open up a full mid-level exception is what I've heard people on Twitter say. So if I'm wrong, blame the Twitter experts. It's just not worth it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. These are 5 players I do not want the Dallas Mavericks to trade for. Again, good players in their own right, outside of a specific one of these guys who I don't think is good whatsoever. But 5 players, not a good, team basketball player. A very talented player, but not a good team basketball player. 5 players I don't want. We'll see which one of these guys is a member of the Dallas Mavericks in a few weeks.